Hi, everybody. I'm here with my fantastic sibling River, and
Aw, hi.
we're gonna talk about it's a book technically.
It's an adventure.
It's
It's a journey and a narrative.
it's a something. Um, I don't know what exactly made us decide to do this, but this is a book. We'll just introduce the book. This is Satan Was a Lesbian, by Monica Roberts, and I'm pretty sure we've established that's not a real name.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's probably a pseudonym, but I don't know. I have thoughts, and I'm questioning a lot of things now. But I'll put a pin in that.
So this is I've heard other people talk about this, and I decided we totally need to look
Uh,
into this because it's very strange. It's out there. A lot of things happen.
oh yeah.
And this is just chapter one. We haven't even gotten out of the first chapter, and stuff has happened. Um, it took me a little bit to get to certain like understandings. I had to remember this is written in
Yeah.
1966 because
Yeah.
like they name drop the Impala, the car, and there's
Yes.
this whole thing about like, oh, they're sitting close to each other, and it's like that's what you can't do that. And then I remember the '66 Impala, yes, you can. So the reason we introduced the car before the characters is because that's literally the first sentence. That is exactly how
Yeah,
this
exactly.
starts. So
Well, yeah, yeah. I actually have a thought on that, but keep going.
basically, the beginnings of this are well, there's like a weird. I don't know if your version has. The versions are different.
Hmm.
There's all these different versions of this book, so it's
Yeah.
very strange.
Mhm.
Starts with our main character, uh, Charlene or Charlie,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
happens, and a very specific, shall we say, interaction with someone named
Hmm.
Marianne, who isn't introduced in the beginning of the book. So I still don't know who this person is.
Yeah. And okay. So here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. So the first thing I noticed when going through is that it doesn't immediately register that there are two people, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
character, there's a named character, and then there's a figure, right?
Yes.
So I'm thinking, okay, so is this person alone or are they with someone? And then, of course, there are two people together. But then I did a little research because I've seen this happen before. And it turned out that some people will create like these semiotically constructed characters. I guess that's the word for it. And they're just symbolic people. They don't exist anywhere except for in the person's imagination.
Hmm.
So by the first page, that was where I was left. This other unnamed character, because they are unnamed, because they are just a figure, because they are just a disembodied um blonde head, like it's like it's like she doesn't exist until she's named, which is kind of weird feeling for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced that.
It's mainly like really confusing because I was like, I don't know why we're starting here before even the title page. Because
Oh yeah.
literally the next page is, oh, this is the title. And though we missed this in the very beginning of this, for those of you who are interested in our backgrounds of literature, River is a very educated and professional individual, and I read stupid
Thank
things on the
you.
internet for money. So this is where we are. That is our
Well, no, like we
that's our
actually,
qualifications.
well, yes, I am a book editor, but I do have to say, you know, it's sometimes very difficult for me to, really go in and like fully talk about my interests in topics like these. Like not everybody's interested in the same books that I am. But you and we often read books together, and it's really nice to be able to sit down and like hang out and talk about these things with you. I can't really do that all the time. Um, and like you're actually one of the few people who I can like these things with and you get it, you know?
Yeah, because it's a very specific, I guess, niche that we kind of have, because it's
Yeah.
not just a book club thing where we all read these books or we like this book, and it's not
Mhm.
just a very, in this instance specifically, a very like LGBT focused thing, because we have that, but
Yeah.
it's also that this is a book that fits both of those, but is not good. And
It's
I love things that are just terrible sometimes because they're really funny. So this is a very specific thing, and I really hope you all
yeah,
enjoy it. So
exactly. See, I don't know. It's very hard for me to look at any book with a few exceptions and think bad, you know? My question is, what is it about this? Just what is it about this? And I'm not allowed to ascribe any adjective that's just like this absolute good or absolute bad. I gotta figure this thing out, right?
yeah, I feel that. The other thing that makes this kind of a, I don't know, I guess interesting perspective for the two of us to come at this is
Yeah.
I have a history in a very specific type of literature, and I use that in giant air quotes, that River doesn't have, which is I have read a lot of really bad fan fiction. So I know, like,
You have read a lot of bad fan fiction.
I am aware of like terrible fan fiction tropes and how that
Yeah.
fits into different things. For some of you who have a while back listened to me talk about some of the Onision books, I specifically said that,
Hmm.
especially the first one, which, spoiler, we may actually get to on this podcast one day,
Oh God.
it definitely feels like it was written in that fashion. And
Mhm.
it's a type of amateur writing fashion that isn't bad per se,
Yeah,
but it's very like specific, and once you notice it everywhere.
exactly. Well, and it's funny because some of the tropes that you find in, the bad fan fictions that you read, they were very much present in like some of the earliest forms of the most accessible pieces of literature.
Right, yeah.
It's just like we don't really think about that, I guess. That
Yeah,
that flair for the dramatic, just that's always been a thing, with people, We like to romanticize things. We want that fascination.
it's I'd always thought of it as kind of a tell that your writer in this instance is kind of self-taught, like they didn't
Yeah.
learn their writing skills from any kind of like school, or like a professional, or even like a book or something like that specifically. They got the
Hmm.
idea from reading other people's works and kind of
Sure.
emulated pieces of that in order to create their own vision. And it kind of feels in a certain way like how that works.
Oh, and do I have something at the tip of my tongue?
Well, let's start with this. One of the things I definitely want to do is I will point out, just because
Yeah.
this happens multiple times in this book, is some of my favorite phrases. And on the
Oh
first
God.
page, I just want to say that on the very first page, my
Yes.
my favorite my favorite piece that is written here is just the phrase "tensed, quivering buttocks," which I want written in cursive on a T-shirt someday.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
It's what a way with
Yeah.
words this person has. So
See, see, what I'm seeing here in like throughout is just this fascination with alliteration,
that does
right?
happen. Yeah, there's a lot of like the way
Yeah.
things are written.
Hmm.
You don't are let me refresh my memory here.
Sure.
Our Miss Roberts, quote unquote, if that is a real person, because a lot of these are written
Yes.
under pseudonyms,
Yes.
definitely has a way of saying, like, they don't just say the word.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be like
Yeah.
the scientific term or just the longest way of saying it. And there's a lot of alliteration specifically with that, which is
Yes.
fascinating, but also like really interestingly weird. It's just,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Well, if we can go back to that first page that you were referring to,
Yeah.
we can moving up there's head and heel helped. And like you start with these very soft but at the same time continuous consonants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that softness is immediately of the H is immediately interrupted by t, g, like that like very strong like phonetic interruptions. And I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's just like it's the the movement I feel is intentional, and the effect I feel is intentional. Uh, Do I think that the author had the language of I have to do alliteration here in mind? No. But I think that it's interesting that that effect was achieved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually it does, because now that you pointed that out, one of the things that I've only read samples so far, but I am trying to
Sure.
get a certain copy of certain Mr. Chuck Tingle's books. But I have
Oh
noticed
God.
that he does that as well. But
He does.
it's it's obviously played for comedy. This is not. This
Yes.
is not being played for comedy. So I haven't read enough of these. I guess you
Yeah.
would call them pulp gay fiction books.
Sure.
I haven't read enough of them to know if this is a thing, but I wonder, because people like Chuck Tingle are writing this as like a joke, if this is like a trope. Is this a thing that like other people do and they just all kind of started doing it together? Because
It's yeah. I will say it's because I have edited more pornographic material because, people pay for it and it sells.
true.
Um, and well, and I mention this because it is very common in that genre specifically. People do that because it's it it's all about appealing to the different senses. And sometimes like if you have it in a book, you can only do that through what the sound would be if you read it in your head. Does that make sense?
It does. I never thought about it like that, but that is interesting.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
the the other fun thing that we're going to have throughout this is not just the style of this writing, but
yeah.
the fact that Miss Roberts has an
Mhm.
interesting way with dialogue. Let's put it that way. It's the dialogue
Oh
is
my God.
it's something. Uh, I
It, yeah.
I
It's
will.
something and it changes. Did you notice?
It does. It kind of changes weirdly.
It changes so suddenly. And I feel like there is a reason for that. I feel like there's a reason for that. But like let's go further because like the audience hasn't read this yet.
No,
We
I will
assume.
say that this book is, and I will just to leave this first page on one note. The very
Sure.
first sentence is a dialogue sentence, and I'm quoting: "Your tummy's a veritable oasis for a thirsty hunter." Never before have I ever read the first sentence of a book and thought, "God, I'm uncomfortable."
Yeah.
That's
Well,
that's a
no,
feat.
and you learn, very early on that that line is clearly a farce.
Yeah.
It's clearly it's it's not spoken in earnest. It's just an act. It's not spoken in earnest. And like of course it's and it makes me wonder. I I actually wonder if like a few times, is this an author in earnest? And I can more reasonably get to why, but I've thought like a few times, there's something intentional being done here, but it's not done with like the same verbiage that I'm like attributing to it.
Yeah. So let's go with our how does our story go? We start
Oh,
we start recklessly driving a what I assume is a 60s era Impala, mainly because this was
yeah.
published in 66. So I can only guess. And it's raining, and
Yes.
just, you know, straight up street racing. We learn that our main character, Charlene Duval, which is a fantastic name, just
Lovely name.
right up there with some of my favorite
Yeah.
over the top character names. I love it.
It's something, all right.
Charlene is basically like street racing before Vin Diesel did it, and it
Well,
is
she's not only, yeah. No, go on, please.
it's it's very like, you know, there's skidding and sliding and death grip on the edge of the seat and all this other stuff, and
Yeah.
this is where we start.
Well, we start with Charlene sitting easily but erect, and
Yeah.
immediately, we're getting into phallic
Oh
implications.
yes. Oh, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, and apparently there is a terrified woman in the car with her.
Well, like she's not even established as a person. Like it just feels like she's symbolic up to a certain point just because she's not named.
Yes, and I you have to kind of put yourself in the headspace of how a lot of this stuff is written, because
Yeah.
wording is like a thing with a lot of this. Because my immediate thought, until they started to establish more of who
Hmm.
this other person is, because she's just introduced as the taught figure of the girl beside her, and I'm thinking girl as in
Yeah.
child. No, wrong. This is another
No.
woman.
Well, and also we learn that Charlene almost like when she first like visualizes this character as a person,
Mm-hmm.
she kind of thinks of her in like this kind of a childlike way. But also there's a way in which she does a little bit of genre defying. Um because by the same token as she's introduced as someone who's going to dominate the narrative, yes,
Mm-hmm.
and I say that very intentionally. This very we might ascribe what we would think as masculine expectations to her, correct?
Yes.
So tell me why, when we talk about our other character who is eventually named, why we want her to stand over Charlene. Why do we have her in these places initiating certain reactions or actions? Like, she is also taking initiative. She takes the first initiative, actually.
To use what background I have on the idea
Yeah,
of from again my background of terrible fan fiction, I've
sure.
actually seen some of this before too. It plays into
Yeah,
a very specific type of power fantasy.
exactly. Well, maybe um 60s also romance magazine heteronormative nuclear family.
Yes, there's that too. But like, if you were to clearly, because this is an original story, so this isn't the case, but if you were to read something where
Sure.
someone in like a fan fiction was to create their own character to be inserted into the narrative, into the world of this pre-existing thing, a lot of times we get
Yeah.
your, you know, your Mary Sue trope, and
Hmm.
the person or character that they like most is like fawning over them, and they are, super badass in a lot of this, and the entire point
Yeah.
is to show this kind of like the rainy streets, the driving incredibly fast, the reckless nature, but
Yeah.
still in complete
Mhm.
control, to show that they have all of this power and they're cool enough to control it all. It's very intentionally played.
Exactly. But like also she's clearly not,
Yeah.
because she's established early on as someone who kind of manipulates certain situations. She clearly, she might have this fantasy, but since she's admitting it, clearly she doesn't have that control.
Yeah, it weirdly goes back and forth like that.
Yeah.
We get like this idea of someone who has all this control, but then is like almost intentionally undercut.
Yeah.
So it's very strange. But to move on, now we have our unnamed blonde, because she keeps
Yes.
referring to her as the blonde, which reminds me of someone else who refers to the male and the female in their stories.
No.
And we start with the blonde saying things like calling out to Charlene, obviously terrified of this, what is clearly really badly reckless driving, like, AKA please don't kill us in this car.
Can I just
So,
point to a phrase on page 4 real quick?
oh, go, please go.
I highlighted this one, and it's the alliteration and the adverb for me. Noted that the nipples protruded nakedly. Please tell me why.
Yes.
Please tell me how. Nakedly.
The constant like observation, I understand where our writer is trying to go, but I can tell you that the constant observation throughout what little I've read so far about other characters, just clearly the
Yeah,
intonation is they're not wearing a bra. And I guess this is supposed to be
yeah,
like, oh, it's like a sexy thing, but all I can think of is Neil Breen movies where he pays actresses extra to not wear bras, and how
yeah.
really uncomfortable it is.
Oh, it
Like, it's
is.
really unnatural and like super weird for no reason.
My God. And just the needless the needless nakedly, to add my own piece of
Yes.
alliteration there. It's completely needless.
No, I absolutely agree with you. It's very much a thing where it's like, it reminds me. Have you ever? You may
Hmm.
actually have. Have you ever seen? There's like, I think it's a subreddit called "Men Writing Women."
You've shown it to me.
Yes, it
You've
makes me
shown
think
it
of
to me.
things.
I have
Yes,
seen it of you.
it makes me think of things like that, where it is clearly a
Yeah.
male author who has a very specific gaze
Oh, God.
trying to describe a female character, but just not doing it, just not
Oh,
doing
God.
it. And
Well, no,
that
yeah.
immediately makes me think of that. It's like they protruded nakedly,
Hmm.
but how? There is a coat and sweater. Why is this word here? What does it mean?
And,
Why?
and nakedly is supposed to modify protruded.
How does one protrude nakedly exactly? I need like an example. Like, what does this
No,
mean?
we don't. We do not need an example. No, thank you.
The wording in this is just, it feels like it was written and then someone else came back, like they were just like, you have to edit this. You need
Uh-huh.
more descriptions. And our
Well,
writer was just like, I own a thesaurus. And from there,
sure.
things happened.
Well, and you want to know what's funny about that? It actually takes me to the next page where that was
Mm-hmm.
when I first noticed it. Um, the whole area is very dark, right? Black,
Yes.
glistening, dark dream. Focusing on focusing on Charlene, very dark, very supposed to be a very alluring character, I'm just like, my immediate thought is like early Gothic romances,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, this is weirdly meeting a lot of the expectations of Gothic romance. And like, we both read the entirety of the first chapter. We got to a home that's, pretty large, right?
Yes.
So wouldn't you say, for the time period, we can kind of consider that kind of a castle-like environment?
Yes, especially
Yeah,
considering how things play out.
ex- exactly. Very Gothic. Well, guess what else is a Gothic novel that precedes Dracula and involves lesbians?
Oh, do tell.
Carmilla.
Mm.
Carmilla. It is a vampire lesbian novel about a young girl who has a dream about another woman who eventually gets in a carriage wreck and is just like this completely alluring figure who starts to make advances towards this this woman, and it's the same dynamic. It's the dark-haired character versus like the blonde character, and it's so funny. The interactions are just so similar here, and I just can't help but think like this is Carmilla.
Yeah, it's very much the trope of the evil that seduces
Yeah.
your good. It's done, like you said, it's done there. It's done in
Mhm.
this. It's clearly one of the running themes of something as what do you call it? Like Grease. That is the
Yeah.
entire purpose of the characters in that. Their main character
Well,
romance. He's a bad boy. She's a good girl. That's like a trope.
and it's not like a change even. It's something, it taps into a deep desire or a fear that your quote good person has, well, who is actually, your ordinary flawed character, but it just kind of draws out the quote dark side of that character.
This idea that uh, seduction is also somehow evil. That it has some sort of
Exactly.
darkness to it.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's a lot of that.
Yeah,
And
it's so incredible.
and while it is a lot of that in this, it's also somewhat supremely awkward, if I might say so.
It is, but
Things,
so is Carmilla.
yeah, it gets a
Hold on, I'll
little
stop.
weird. It gets no, you're fine. It gets a little weird because
It
like
does.
you have a lot of like the what do you call it? You have a lot of like the basics of understanding,
Yes.
like what it's supposed to be. You have the outline of, oh, this is how seduction works, and then you get into the
Yeah.
actual specifics, and it's like that's a weird thing to say.
Yeah. It's strange. Well, there's that shift in language, and it feels like the objective of like the language shifts because when we open with Charlene and our so far unnamed blonde character, the language
Mm-hmm.
is very intentional, very measured, actually not very dialectical so much as the first meeting between the two characters, in which Charlene is actually heavily dialectical and might come across as someone who merges with that, part of society, right?
Yeah.
You don't get the same feeling that Charlene is the same person here.
Even in the wording, there's a lot of play that
Yeah,
like Charlene is somehow two distinct personalities.
yeah.
Like two specific ways of acting.
Well, in a lot of ways, like she's several distinct personalities. She even says, I've just got to, what does she say specifically? She says you've just got to find, like you've just got to find that one point that they're sensitive to, and then you just like you pull them in.
Hi there, it's me, that guy you've been listening to. I know, this is weird. Also, have you been enjoying this podcast? I imagine you have because you're, listening to it. If you, yes, you, I mean it, you. I'm talking to you. Wanted to read one of the books that we are reading right now in this very strange and fun adventure that we're on, you can do that by checking out the list specifically on bookshop.org. That's right. bookshop.org/shop/moonhorse. That is the list where we put all of our books that we have read or will read on this fantastic show. If you want to read along with us, find the kind of strange things that we're into, and actually kind of enjoy this, more than you already are, you can do that by going there. Bookshop.org is a fantastic resource for independent booksellers and just, generally everybody. That way you don't have to buy from freaking Amazon, you know what I'm saying? Go there, check it out, become a part of our own strange literary cult. It's a cult. Alright, it's not a cult. It's not cool enough to be a cult. But it is a fun show, which you're listening to, and we hope you enjoy it. So thank you for being a part of this. Make sure you check out bookshop.org. That's bookshop.org/shop/moonhorse. It's a long URL, but an even longer list of books. It's a lot of, establishing that she has some sort of manipulative capability.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like her personality changes depending on who she wants to attract. Does that make sense?
So, no, it does, actually. It makes a lot of sense. I also love such wonderful, you could explain by just interaction or even go through, certain interaction to show...
Yeah.
That there are certain things that Charlene does that are weird or manipulative or anything like that. But sometimes they just kind of come right out and say it.
Yeah.
Which is a little on the nose, because we have quotes like, "You have such a strange way. You frighten me." Which is literally what the entire first half of this chapter was establishing, but okay.
Yes. Well, and I guess... Can I draw a parallel real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm going to move back to Carmilla a little bit just to kind of show you. And it's the point where Charlene, and we've already named one character, and Charlene says, "Darling, no, not so fast. We have all the time in the world, the whole night if we want it. If we want it, our own cozy little world, just the two of us with no one to see, hear, or say anything." Carmilla says, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Think me not cruel because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours." Okay, tell me that's not similar.
It is. It's very similar. So that raises the question, I wonder if the person who wrote this had read that.
I'm actually fairly certain because, the other thing that gets to me is a point where your leading character in Carmilla, we don't actually even know the narrator's name until way, way far down in the story. And we also don't know a lot about the characteristics of Carmilla, except for her name, Carmilla. And it's the same with Charlene. We don't really know a lot about Charlene. We just kind of know what she does. But what's interesting about this is, it doesn't really register to the reader that we don't know a lot about Charlene.
It's really interesting that you say that, because a good kind of, I guess my own observation of not knowing enough about Charlene is I assumed by just the idea of, fast driving, this image of, bravado and badass and all this, that, oh, she must be one of those kind of leather jacket badass kind of, but no, that's not even the outfit. It's not that. And it actually kind of threw me because I was kind of expecting that,
Yeah.
I expected if we're going to lean into a trope, then it's going to be the whole way, but it really didn't. And it was okay, so we don't really do know too much. And I wonder how intentional that was.
And it actually makes me think, we don't know anything about who wrote this, so, in some ways we can assume that this might have even been in earnest. It was supposed to be kind of genre-defying, and that's what really made it stand out, what made it so discursive,
Yeah, it makes a lot of like really interesting thing. Now I have to keep reminding myself because specifically with dialogue
Yeah.
that this was written in like 66 because there's a thing that happens repeatedly through the dialogue where sometimes characters will say the same thing repeatedly.
Yes.
Not in like a exact way, but like the kind of thing that's said over and over, which happens in my experience with like certain like fan fiction writing, which is you're trying to get across a very specific point or you're trying to show emphasis, but instead of just saying the thing, you repeat it to show that emphasis, and it just kind of it sticks with you because of how like somewhat awkward it is, like how like why would you need to continue to say that, but it is very interesting.
I think about that and I think, we did write like that. We did speak like that. There was a point at which it was something that we did.
It's it a lot of the dialogue feels as though it was actually spoken, like it was something that the writer maybe actually knew people who talk like that or something. It feels like more talking than anything, and there's a lot of focus on like alliteration through certain things. So it's definitely interesting. It's definitely a strange sample of how, I guess, things, because a lot of stuff that we have that are like highly accredited or things like that tend to fit into that kind of timeless genre. This is not that. This is very much of its time. And
it is.
You kind of get like the, because it's so strange because you don't really see that.
What I didn't expect from this particular book is the way that it didn't decide to settle in any one particular set of expectations. And I say this as someone who thinks of genre as something that people kind of aspire towards but never quite reach. And I think of people like Virginia Woolf, right, who's very modernist. And when I think of genre defying, I think of her, and she was not focused on correctness of her work. She was focused on how she felt and how she wanted to portray certain feelings. And like this was back 1920s, 1930s. And authors have always, they've sought to be published, sure, but then we have these people who were revolutionaries, and they wanted to take what people expected from certain books. They wanted to defy it. They wanted to be recognized as, something beyond just maybe a gothic novelist, a romance novelist. I almost wonder, was this book trying to do that?
I don't know. So the main reason we're focusing on so much of this being like the way it's written and everything is, one, it's interesting, but two, the same issue I had with this first chapter is there's bits in it that are interesting, but it's the same issue I had whenever I did the thing talking about 50 Shades of Grey, which is how many times in a chapter can you say they had sex, the end? Because that's basically kind of what happens. So,
but did it though?
Which, yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff in the middle of this.
Well, I mean,
there's
it's sex, but like it doesn't even register as sex.
Yeah,
Isn't that weird?
So much time
kind of blurs.
Yes, there is an inordinate amount of time of slow clothing removal. And I say that as inordinate because it goes on for, I'd estimate, around 6 pages.
Absolutely.
And it's a little strange. But
Yeah, I mean, that's what erotica is supposed to be for.
Every time as you're reading it, you're like, okay, then
Hmm.
you think like, okay, now this is going to happen. It doesn't. It just
Sure.
changes gears entirely. Right when you think that something is going to happen more, when finally there are no clothing, there's a foot rub that happens.
Oh well.
And then Charlene does this thing, um, which is surprisingly strange.
Mm.
Which is she just kind of stops doing everything, like goes weirdly silent and just stares, and it's very, very odd.
Death-like, almost vampiric,
Yes,
wouldn't you say?
yes, because
She's a
that is
vampire.
literally.
She's a vampire. I swear to
It
you.
keeps coming back to that. That's what I thought too. Is like, okay, so she's a vampire, except no, that isn't even what happens in this book. But it would make more sense.
Well, she's not a vampire. I'm joking, but she is
Yeah.
vampiric. Like she's
Yes.
those are the expectations that she's fulfilling, and she kind of drains at. Can I name her?
Yes, we finally have a name.
Yes, she kind of drains Cynthia's energy.
There does seem to be a lot of that.
Yeah, like she's kind of like tapering at that.
Again, we have another fantastic line where they're just staring at her weirdly, and Cynthia's like, "You look dead." And
Yeah.
then Charlene replies, "The gates of hell are waiting, Cynthia. Enter and be eternally damned." You know, that classic pillow
Oh
talk.
yes.
Uh,
I
how many
wait.
times have we all said that?
Well, yeah. Thus is the point of transformation. No?
It's it's very strange, but
It
that
is.
and then it just kind of continues. We
Yeah.
keep going from there. That was, I guess, a thing we needed.
Well,
Um,
and like you notice it later. It comes up later. Like Charlene kind of like stops whatever she's doing and she just kind of jokes around a little bit.
yeah,
And like she even admits that she's joking around. And it's just like it, as soon as we understand that, then we can go back and understand that yes, this was one of those times. Maybe. But then you don't know because she's a vampire. I'm kidding.
yeah. It's it would make so much sense if she actually was just a vampire, but like that's not even what this is. So then we completely cut away from that to a flashback.
Oh,
The night before. So now we're at a drive-in.
yeah.
Charlene works there
Hmm.
and is not a fan of it. Um,
Yeah.
and that's where we see how they first met.
It's
And
so funny because she thinks that the car is a man's car.
yes,
And she gets
it's
into, yeah.
specifically, yeah, like, but the thing that really gets me about this is it's it really gets like super weird with this idea of like she goes to the car
Yeah.
because it's like a drive-in. She's got
Yeah.
to, okay, what do you want?
Hmm.
And there's Cynthia,
Yeah.
and she knows her name immediately.
Yes, because she's been watching.
Yes. So
She
in this
initiates the
moment,
contact.
in this moment, Charlene learns that A, she has a stalker, and B is like, yeah, I'll get in the car with you.
Well,
Which is just like, okay.
well, specifically, Charlene, like the supposedly wounded Charlene, gets in Cynthia's space where presumably Cynthia both initiates contact and has either control or the illusion of control because that is her space, right? It feels
Yeah,
like,
it
yeah, because like Charlene is just so, she's very like, wants to be dominant, possibly, but also kind of is drawn in by that.
no, it's interesting because it's a lot of like it starts with this idea of, and I guess maybe it's our own perception of more modern media, with
Yeah.
this idea of like, oh, she already knows who Charlene is, as if she's been watching her. And it's like, that's uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
then Charlene, like, in the span of like 30 seconds, just completely takes over the situation by being like, oh, I just wanted to see if you had a bra on. And
Yeah.
suddenly Cynthia's like, you're very frank. Oh, goodness. I like, her personality just switches into like, oh my gosh, oh goodness, I do declare. And it's
Well,
very like,
yeah,
it's a little odd.
it is. It is. But it's what's strange about that moment is like, I mean, like you said, like this immediate honesty about the intentions. It's just like, just add in that little grain of truth, right? It's like she's clearly attracted to this person. He clearly kind of wants to draw her in, but in a lot of ways, it just sort of feels like, yes, she's kind of coming back and taking control in that sense, but why does it feel like she also wants to be controlled?
It's a lot of back and forth,
Yeah,
especially because like in the entire first interaction, she kind of brushes off the idea that this person, that Cynthia's been watching her,
yeah,
and a lot of her questions are because she specifically is like, "Oh, your eyes are completely black, aren't they?" And she's like,
yeah,
"Yeah, they are. Do you want something?" And I
yeah,
guess
like because
because
she's been
in
asked
her
that
mind,
several times.
yeah, and in her own way, she's gauging, I guess, whether or not this person is interested in her in any way, or if
Yeah.
this is just some weirdo who wants to gawk at her,
Hmm.
which is an interesting kind of like, usually with this idea of, I don't know, almost like a power fantasy writing or
Yeah,
any kind of fantasy specific writing, you don't usually have that level of conversation because it's supposed to, oh, it all fits, everything fits, but this is
yeah,
more like, I have to gauge whether or not you're worth it, which again gives her this feeling of control, this feeling of like
yeah,
being the dominant person here.
yeah. And, of course, Charlene has a fateful look about her. She looked into the depths of hell and still remembered vividly what she saw there.
There's a lot of that too. Which of course, considering when this was written and
Yeah,
considering a lot of the tropes that go into this, that's not terribly surprising.
yeah. And it's not, and also a lot of the romance magazines that were published during this time, they kind of acknowledged it. Um, they romanticize the whole love at first sight. That is like how to like immediately attract someone, bring someone under your spell, how to, snag yourself a husband or whatever.
Yeah, I do have to say that my favorite thing about what even you quoted from this
Yeah.
passage about the look of tragedy about you, I do like
Yeah.
Charlene's response, which is more of like a, oh Christ, you're like an amateur dramatist. Are you one of those homegrown head shrinkers? It's like,
It
not
was,
again. Like this has happened before.
and clearly it has, this is a thing that actually happens to people, which, I actually had to take a step back and think about that. It's just like there are people who can like actually identify with that sentiment. Like, oh my God, you're like an armchair psychologist.
Mm-hmm. It definitely feels that way. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, it's very, I don't know. It's like, it has that feeling that we went from this idea of, from before the flashback of
Hmm.
Charlene being this, rogue in control kind of badass, to this part where it's like, she's clearly being confronted by what is obviously like some kind of stalker. This is very much like Cynthia's constantly going on about like, you have this look about you, you have all this, and it's like, how long have you been sitting outside of this drive-in? This is a multiple day incursion, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's almost it's a little meta in a way, don't you think?
It fits kind of like the opposite of what you would expect, to use something like Dracula, for example.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be your vampire, your dangerous creature that stalks the victim and like knows all their secrets and all this other stuff. And then it's kind of the other way around. It's kind of Charlene just exists, and then there's this weird girl who's been watching her for like weeks, and now all of a sudden is like, I'm here.
That's kind of what happened in Carmilla. Like these two girls have the same dream, and then they suddenly like they can't keep their minds off of one another because they both perceived the other to be very beautiful. And like their first kind of memory of each other is like this dream, this embrace, and then suddenly they encounter one another and they they're inseparable because they met in this dream. And it's not the same. It's not like the stalking situation, but there's this like
Yeah,
there's this one person
the
is
sense of like
demanding,
fate.
yes, fate,
Yeah,
demanding a claim on the other's intimacy.
yeah. And this one, it's like they kind of went in that direction, but then you have
Yeah.
phrases like, you have you've got phrases where it's just like, could you get away from this place? Take a ride with me. You've only got. She knows exactly when she gets off work. That's not fate. That's stalking.
It is stalking.
Oh, you've been here several times. It's like, it's a little weird. It gets very strange.
But going back to the amateur dramatist comment, is this the author saying that we should not be armchair psychologists about this?
It's possible. I don't.
I'm
It
reaching.
could be. I don't
I'm
know how
reaching.
deep exactly. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So can we move forward to the weird house encounter?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. So they leave the drive-in and they go to Cynthia's parents' house,
Yeah.
which is already a little weird. Um,
Her space.
and yes, and then there is just booze. There is booze involved.
Of course.
And there is even like a whole bearskin rug. There's a whole thing going on here.
Well, they acknowledge the weirdness of the bearskin rug, but it's Charlene who's kind of thrown off by the rug.
Yeah, because it's like, really, a bearskin rug? Like,
Yeah.
we get to the part that I find like possibly the like, for some reason, there's they change clothes,
Yeah.
and Charlene's wearing her dad's robe, and she
Yeah.
starts calling her daddy, which is immediately uncomfortable.
Well, and she also like she also has this line, I am a man, honey, just call me Charlie. That's where the Charlie comes from.
Yes. And that I was just like, okay, that's weird. A lot of
And
this is weird.
and also, have you encountered the term rumpus before?
Yes.
Yes, so have I. But I wanted to know where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised because it actually comes from a word that's obsolete. And it's robustious, which means boisterous or noisy. But when you actually go down there, they actually refer to it, or at least Cynthia does, as the relaxation room. which is kind of weird. Because, like,
Yeah.
first she calls it the rumpus room, and then she calls it the relaxation room. We're
I didn't
keeping
know
the
that
R.
specifically about the word. Yeah, so
Yeah. No, isn't that weird? Like,
it is.
yeah, it's like setting up this expectation for like this kind of a noisy moment, like even like a deep sexual encounter that is noisy, and there is an encounter of a sexual nature that does turn noisy, but she refers to it as the relaxation room when she automatically goes down there. A little weird, huh?
So yes, they wind up in the relaxation room,
Or the rumpus room.
and there's just talking and booze,
Uh-huh.
which is something that would make sense if they had gotten to know each other a little bit more. But remember, they literally just met. So,
They just met and they already have like a certain level of intimacy, Carmilla.
yeah, it's it's very like okay. Um
It's fate, remember?
oh yeah, there's several wonderful like phrases that come out of this, and my my favorite one, if I can quote for just a minute here, is is Cynthia took another gulp of her drink. Well, what'll we talk about first? Charlene remained completely motionless. Your breasts, Cynthia. Let's talk about your breasts. It's like, oh, you're just going right for it, aren't you?
And I don't know, like, on the one hand, like, I shouldn't laugh because, you know, this is the body and the body isn't weird exactly. So, like, from that perspective, immediately sexualized. I don't know. Like, it throws me because I'm expecting, like, sexualization, but instead she says, because you're beautiful, because they're beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
yeah,
it's a very strange conversation from there. Like I get what we're trying to aim for, but
yeah.
then
It doesn't
like
happen, but it's weird because, like, it's weirdly, kind of, it doesn't, like, it's not sexual in a weird way. It's a little bit romantic in a weird way.
it kind of goes back and forth with like it doesn't feel like a conversation that you would expect people to have that are not being written in this specific way.
Yeah.
Like I remember reading this and my first thought was if this wasn't a book, I I don't claim to know
Yeah.
every conversation a group of lesbians has ever had, but I'm fairly
Yeah.
certain this isn't one of them.
Oh, oh,
And
oh, oh, the things that a group of lesbians will get up to jokingly.
I just keep repeating in my head that I forget who it was that was said it, but it's like talking about no, it was a thing about corporations. I think it was from a video I watched where it's just like all I can think of is like Robo Lesbian 9000, am real lesbian, am not soulless robot, have feelings too.
Well,
It's very stilted and weird.
and you want to know what that made me think of? I went to a concert of my one of my favorite groups, Muna, and something that she talked about, something I didn't think about, was he said, a lot of queer discourse and a lot of queer stories, tales, songs, media, if it's written from a very like queer-based perspective, a lot of it has to do with longing. I think I'm seeing that, and that's what I'm thinking of. And that kind of drives me toward this weird thought that, maybe this was in earnest, you know?
Maybe. Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah. And it was like some weird undercover lesbian fan fiction writer who really wanted to be published, but knew that she needed to meet these expectations, it's a possibility.
It does feel like that. Like,
Yeah,
it feels like you'll have whole sections
yeah,
where, like, you can kind of, I don't know, almost feel like this is supposed to be something that not makes sense. I'm not sure how I want to word it, but, like,
sure.
feels like it's going somewhere,
Yeah.
and then it's interrupted with something that doesn't really fit that well, and it kind of
Mhm.
feels like it was written one way, and then afterwards it's like, okay, now we have to insert all this stuff because this is what
Yeah.
has to happen because of the times and all this other crap. And it's very, you can kind of like see the weird stitching, you know? It's like
Yeah.
this is supposed to be one way and then it kind of goes into a different way. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain.
It is. It is. And you're right. It kind of and it goes back to that idea of longing. It's just because, do you want that moment to be resolved? Is that what bothers us so much about that?
I'm not sure. The whole thing is just
It's okay.
very, it's just fascinating in its
It is.
strangeness. Like there's the whole, again, back to the vampire angle. Everything
Yeah.
that would be like a power that you would expect some sort of vampire to have
Yeah.
is in this, but not attributed directly to Charlene.
Yeah.
Like Cynthia talks about how excited she gets by being frightened, and then like,
Yeah.
and I don't run away from it, I run towards it, and it's like, yeah, that would be a vampire thing, except it's not Charlene doing it. It's just she knows that this person does this and knows how to use that.
It's it's a thing that gothic protagonists do, but they just don't admit to it. And like that's also something that we talk about. It happens in horror movies. Like people are really dumb in horror movies.
Yeah,
And that where that comes from, I don't actually know specifically where that comes from, but I theorize that there is a kind of a gothic angle to that.
I think you might be right. I think you
Hmm.
might be, because then we get to the part where she does the frozen thing again,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's just not moving.
Hmm.
But it's clearly because this is the chapter or that section where we just learn, like, oh, if I'm frightened I get all excited. That's not the word she uses, but the wording is from this is very weird. And
Yeah.
then we get to, now we do this whole thing where it's just she starts like stalking the room back and forth weirdly, and then turns off the lights and like scares the hell out of her repeatedly.
Yeah.
So it's very like, okay, um this is certainly something. This feels like this whole section, this feels like the thing that is happening here is this is somebody's thing. This is clearly somebody's thing, and it was
I'm
definitely
sure.
written that way. uh
It's not something that I recognize, but it's yeah, like a big part of like again going back to this idea of like seducing the gothic protagonist. They're often seduced by the dark and the mysterious.
it does start to kind of feel like that. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of, it definitely feels like this goes beyond the idea of, like, from one of the some of the people I've seen actually talk about this,
Hmm.
it starts to go beyond the idea of this is just kind of a pulp fiction
Sure.
thing done specifically about lesbians, and more into this is a very specific thing that this person is into.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing about that in I forget what the exact, I don't even know if it has a name, but it's kind of like a
Hmm.
trope that happens a lot in like fan fictions and
Hmm.
stuff, which is
Yeah.
where your writer will just insert randomly something they are specific, especially if your fan fiction is a more adult oriented, it'll just boom, middle of it, there's a sex thing that is very specifically something they're into, but there's no warning of it. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
And with this, there's a little bit of that, but only after the initial encounter where we actually find out, like, that's kind of the thing. But it's definitely like, okay, this feels way too specific.
It is. It's very specific. It's and I don't know. It's hard to say just based on how it's written and like because we don't know intention, we kind of have to speculate. Um, are we making fun of the tropes within the book, or are we endorsing them?
Yeah, it's very strange. It's hard to say because it's like it's not clear from the outset if
It's
there
not.
is some sort of like, yeah, if there's some kind of comedy to it,
Yeah,
or if this is all being played straight.
yeah.
And that's
Straight?
also a thing because
Straight?
ah, I see what you did there.
Oh, you opened the door to that one.
It is it does kind of go back and forth with this idea of what's happening and how it's happening, and especially because like I didn't read the second chapter yet. I only
Right.
kind of read the first little bit of it,
Hmm.
but it is heavily like drawn out that this whole relationship moves incredibly fast.
It does. Carmilla.
Like, yeah, because in the beginning we don't know, before this whole flashback, we have a basic idea of how long it is they've known each other.
Yeah.
So this at this point was 2 days. We have the first meeting in which they definitely, let's just say there was a certain kind of encounter, and then day two where it happens a second time. So this is very physical, very fast,
Yeah.
and it's very like played to a very specific way. Like you definitely start to see Charlene's kind of manipulative tactics start to come out more and more, where it's just like, oh, you have to say that you love me, and as soon as she does, it's like, okay, now get our stuff together, we're going. And it's
Well,
like,
yeah.
it's
So
very quick.
something came to mind as soon as you said that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes back to like, is this in earnest? Because do you think that the idea of this like taboo relationship and wanting to find, this willing participant in quote unquote this um this deviancy, do you think it's just like this mutual wanting of that and just like being in close proximity to that that just aids the progression of this relationship? It's just like I'm never going to find this again.
I guess I don't know. I guess we'll find out more as we continue
Yeah.
on. Because
Hmm.
so far we know so very little about any of these characters.
It's true. We know nothing about Charlene, and I mean, even looking up, hold on. Her smile was a little vacant now, and she tittered more and more frequently as Charlene went on with her mostly fictitious account of the days and nights activities. Okay, Cynthia, let's talk about you. She's acting as though she's talked about herself, but she hasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's so good at like playing up this image. It's just like, yeah, now you know all these things about me because I've gone on and on and on. But you find that you actually don't.
Yeah. And more specifically, we don't.
We don't.
Because that whole
Exactly.
thing is, yeah, it's she may have told these stories about her day's activities, but we don't even know what the stories are. They're glossed over because we don't know that.
Yeah.
So we really don't know her as a character, all we know is that she can be manipulative to this other person, and that's
Yeah.
about it.
Isn't it weird how, you feel like once you've gone through this chapter that you know so much, you feel like you can say you know a lot about this character, but you don't.
Mm-hmm.
You can try and like kind of put yourself in Cynthia's shoes in that respect. It's just like, can you imagine then being in love with a person like that? Like being in love with, whoever you project upon this person who you feel like you know so much about, but you don't.
Yeah, and it's throughout that we have the flashback, and then it comes back to,
Yeah.
I guess, the next day. But within this short time, we kind of see a little bit of what Charlene's, I guess,
Mhm.
true colors are, which is everything goes slowly at first. Everything is excitement and longing and building and all this other, and then as soon as it's over, it's like, okay, we're done. That's it. I'm done. And like, you can see Cynthia reacting poorly to this. Like, doesn't
Yeah.
want this kind of callousness, but Charlene doesn't care. She's done. She's got what she
But
wanted.
is
She's
she
done.
though? Does she just not respond because she just wants that longing to continue?
It's That's possible too. We
Uh,
don't know until the next chapter. So, as a kind of personal, I guess, note to this, for chapter 1, what are your impressions so far? What do you think of this?
I'm honestly, there's a lot that I was just like, ugh, oh my God, what is this? But then, but then I was just like so amazed because I know Carmilla. I've read Carmilla, and I don't know. I'm a little bit fascinated by that, and this has raised so many interesting questions for me, and like, and it's like I said kind of at the beginning, I'm not seeing, good or bad, but I'm seeing something that I can kind of follow in a very interesting way. And
Mm-hmm.
I I think I'm excited to explore these questions further. And I want to see like where that resonance takes me.
That makes sense. Yeah. I I kind of I don't know Carmilla exactly. I've never read it.
I gotta send it to you.
Yeah. But I have noticed certain tropes, which a lot of other people who I've watched talk about this have said they
Mhm.
see as well. And I question a lot more of like if that'll show up more. So one of the
Yeah.
prevalent theories is that one, the writer's name is a pen name. That's not their real name. And
Sure.
that two, it was actually written by a man.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see where some people are coming from with that, because
Hmm.
despite the fact that this is supposed to be a story specifically of two women,
Hmm.
Charlene's constant insistence on masculine everything makes people kind of think that this might be a way for like a man specifically, to write this in a perspective that he would understand. I
Uh,
don't entirely know how true that is. I mean, obviously, I don't know if any of it's true, because I don't think anybody actually knows who really wrote this.
sure.
So I can
And it's yeah.
I can kind of see where, for example, I can kind of see where people like that are coming from, but at the same time, I also know that just because you're female doesn't mean that you can't have masculine traits or be dominant in a relationship or any of these things.
Sure.
So that's where it starts to get really, I guess, blurry in that like in that respect, because it's like is it one or is it the other? And I honestly don't have enough information to say either way. I guess maybe as it goes on, we'll find out, but I actually don't know.
We were talking about this, like, it's very difficult to buy into that masculineness if you take that view, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Like I've heard a lot of people say that, but at this stage, I really can't say one way or the other. Actually, I'm kind of surprised because the people I've heard talk about it have cited several of these specific scenes that we just went through as like these, amazing, audacious, strange things that have happened in this book. I was a little surprised they happened in chapter 1. That's a little quick. I kind of thought we'd get a few chapters in before that, but no, right away.
Nope, we're in.
Yeah, I was like, okay, moving quick, are we? All right. So this is fascinating. I am very happy to have this wonderful experience to share with you, River. we have seen things.
We have.
One might say that we've seen the gates of hell.
Clearly, we have not only seen the gates of hell, but we've taken a step towards it. And now we are reading the writing upon the gates.
Well, for that, I think we'll call this an episode. So, if you are all enjoying this, please make sure to, subscribe and all that good stuff. We have links to everything and all the descriptions.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to promote before we call this an episode?
Oh, well, sure. First of all, feel free to go to purposefulprose.org/blog if you want to read my thoughts about anything involving writing. Please donate to Moon's Ko-Fi. Thank you so much for having me, by the way. I feel so privileged and so lucky to be able to sit here and talk with you about things.
Thank you for being a part of this.
Well, thank you so much for opening the space. I am so grateful. Just thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. It's fun to have somebody I can talk about this stuff with. And
exactly.
If you have a suggestion for something we should read, make sure you let us know, and we'll try to do that in the future. Who knows? Maybe your suggestion will become something that is mentioned on this podcast. We'll have to find out as things go. But all that being said, we hope you're enjoying this show, even though it's only episode 1. We hope that you have a wonderful whatever time of day it is. Try not to get stalked at the drive-in, and we'll see you in the next episode. I love you all. Goodbye.
Much love. Bye-bye.